one of the things that is really important to me is stability, and that's, you know, and it really comes from a statement that you made to me a few years ago around is that you can only develop as much strength as you can stabilise.
That's right. Look, certain complexes throughout the body are designed to be more stable than others. Others are designed to be full of motion. Okay, and again, it will depend from activity to activity sometimes. Now, with cycling, generally you want a stable pelvis. Okay, so that you can get great force transmission through the hips, through the knees, through the ankles, into the pedal.
And if you look at great cyclists that just ride really well, you know, I mean, they're just really quite stable in the hips. Time trialing, riding on the bike, you know, hill climbing. It's like they're, you know, locked in there, and everything's driving from hits, and that's what I like to replicate and what I like to teach to the cyclists that are doing either my indoor training sessions or you know, out on the road. It's all about just making sure that you've got a good core to be able to develop good driving force through the legs.
Look, that's right, but when we talk stability, we're still talking an ability to have motion, but the right amount of motion at the right time. And it will be subtle motion. Like I spoke to you about this a little earlier. Subtle motion is sometimes even more important than the bigger motions of the lower extremities for cycling. Okay, even though you'll see there's not a lot of movement in the pelvis for the top cyclists, they look very steady. Subtle motion can just be 1 or 2 degrees.
No, I mean, they're still moving on the bike, you know, and there's a little bit of rolling in the shoulders and those sort of things. I mean, there's still movement. They're not like rock.
No, they're not rock solid, but
it is very stable.
That stability still, because there is I suppose there's a difference in understanding with stability. Some people believe that stability is static, and then there's stability which is dynamic. Okay, which is what we apply. We apply dynamic stability, just the right amount of motion that will transfer the forces and the stresses from one complex to another. Okay, and so, you know, without them occurring, then you end up with compensations from, you know, immobility, from those hips not moving at all, and so something has to compensate for forces to be able to transmit it through the system. And those joints which have to compensate aren't really the ones that are designed to do it. Okay, so then they start to end up with wear, tear, strain, injury, inflammation, all that sort of stuff, and generally a loss in force output on the bike.
Right. So, well, let's go to like a classic exercise, the leg press, my pet hate. So here's an exercise where you're locked into the leg press and your legs are just pummering away at the weight. Now, great for developing strength, but obviously, you know, tell us about the translation back into, you know, the dynamic movements involved in cycling. So what's some of the issues with the leg press?
Some of the issues. The main one is it's totally fixed. Okay, and when I say fixed, is the plane of motion that plate will move in is what we call sagittal, which is forward and back or up and down. Okay.
So when you're on a bike, obviously when you're driving, you know, there's a little bit of rotation in your hips, right, as you're driving into the bike. So because you're locked into the machine, you're not getting that.
You're not getting any rotation. And leg press generally, I mean, you can do it single leg. You can do it bilaterally, which is 2 legs. Most people will do it bilaterally. Okay.
2 legs.
2 legs, that's right. Again, the carryover, you know, there's none of that rotation. There's no integration through those hips into the core and the shoulders and the scap, which also transmit, you know, force and power and whatever into the handlebars. You know?
So you're developing strength in your legs, but there's no development of strength to stabilise that power in your hips or in the back, or, you know, all the way through that chain, holding onto the handlebars. And of course, when you get out of the seat, you know, everything changes, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Because you're not actually on the seat anymore. When you get out of the seat, suddenly your hips are floating in free space. Right, and the leg press doesn't really replicate
doesn't allow for that at all.
And the other thing about the leg press is that, you know, you're actually sitting back on it.
So you're what we call supine, as opposed to prone. So positions, forces are all different through the hips. You know, I mean, yes, leg press does build strength and hypertrophy. Okay, it has
and I'm not saying that it doesn't, right?
But in terms of having the ability to transmit forces and stresses through the whole system, it cuts out.
Cuts out because you're basically locked into that machine.
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And of course, you know, the other thing about, you know, you talked about, you know, pushing against that machine and that sagittal plane, right?
Yep.
Is it sagittal or
sagittal?
Sagittal plane.
Yep.
All right. You know, when you get off the seat in a bike, of course, you know, your hips are floating in free space, and there's movement, and the bike's moving.
Yep.
And when you go to sprint,
Yep.
of course, there's a lot of movement happening.
Yeah, huge amount of movement.
Now, if you look at sprinters like, I like to go back to like Robbie McEwen, and you see him sprinting. If you see video footage, like he's driving away at the bike, and his hips are quite stable, like they're stable, but they're obviously still moving. But his bike's it's just going backwards and forwards, right?
Yep.
You know, so there's obviously some movement that's happening there. And the other thing about, you know, driving into the legs is that, you know, there's forces being applied one side at a time rather than both sides at the same time. And you alluded to that, didn't you?
Yeah, look, it is with the legs, but even though there's force going through one side with the legs, it will generally transmit to the opposite side through the shoulders.
Yep.
Okay, and the body will work that rotational pattern to power the bike.
Yep.
And that's why that bike moves so much, okay? Because you're forcing one side of, you know, through the legs into the opposite shoulder and then pulling it back and creating this great, not only what we call transverse, which is rotational, okay, but frontal plane motion of that bike, which is side to side, that enables so much power to go into the pedals.
Yeah.